Here's the reason that we do this. We want to grow together right where we are. So I'm here with our youth pastor, Naomi, our worship pastor, Braden, and you guys know me. I'm Matt, right? We're here every week. So if you haven't been joining us, what we've been doing is we've been going through the book of Mark just a little bit at a time. So we are actually going to be starting chapter 12. A lot happens in chapter 11. You know what I mean? Jesus is making his way in for the triumphant entry. Basically, he's making his way to the cross. They pass a fig tree. He curses it, flips over tables. Yeah. They walk back by. The fig tree is in the ground. Jesus says probably one of the most quoted maybe prayer texts or faith statements. If you have the faith, if you just have a little bit of faith, you can tell a mountain to throw itself in the ocean. And then he gets challenged. This is crucial. The last part of that is the religious leaders are kind of up in his grill, and they want to know, hey, by what authority are you doing? So Jesus asks them a question. They can't answer it because one requires them to either acknowledge who Jesus is or to kind of go against what the people believe about John the Baptist. Yeah. So Jesus says, well, if you can't answer, then I'm not answering either. So that's where we're going to pick up. Mark chapter 12. Naomi's going to read it this morning, 1 through 12.
Okay, it says, Jesus then began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, but he put a wall around it and dug a pit for the winepress and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit from the vineyard. But they seized him and they beat him and they sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to them, and they struck this man on the head, and treated him shamefully. He sent still another, and that one they killed. He sent many others, and some of them they beat, and others they killed. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, they will respect my son. But the tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they took him, and they killed him, and they threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyards to others. Haven't you read the scriptures of Scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. And the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest Jesus, because they knew he had spoken the parable against them, but they were afraid of the crowd, so they left him and went away.
So there's a lot of this going on. I know for some people they're like, and we kind of in our life group have been talking about like how do you read the Bible, because there's a bunch of parts, like especially through Mark, where Jesus teaches, and he teaches in parables or he teaches in stories, but there are other times where it's very like straightforward. You know, here he's using a parable, so he's using a story to convey a point. In this story, I think we need to define some characters, right? So who's the target audience? Who is Jesus teaching at this moment?
Talking to the Pharisees.
Yeah, the Pharisees, Sadducees, all of those who throughout the book of Mark have started plotting to take him out, right? Yeah. So he tells this story about this farmer, right, who has a vineyard, builds all this stuff, and he has tenants working the farm, and the farmer goes off. So let's start to define some characters. Who's the farmer in the story? If we're going to look at it in parables, and Jesus is using analogies to portray moments or circumstances or people, who would be the farmer? The owner of the land.
God.
That's right. So it's God. God is the one who builds this vineyard, which would be Israel at the time. And he goes away and he leaves tenants working the farm. Who are the tenants?
Us. Well, them.
It would actually be, it would be the religious leaders.
Yeah.
So at harvest time, it's interesting because most of the time the Bible talks about fruit. It's talking about like obedience, right? Or the things that come out in your life. So he sends back, think about this. He sends 3 different times. He sends back messengers to come and get fruit, to see what's coming out. And the first one, they take him up, they beat him. Yeah. Second one, what is it? They do something similar. The third one, they basically
treated him shamefully.
Yeah, they killed the third one. Okay, so who are these tenants? Who are these messengers?
Prophets. Yeah, like Moses and Elijah and
that's it.
All the bigwigs.
See, it's the prophets, right? What you guys are talking about. It's everybody that God had sent before to say, hey, listen, this isn't what we're supposed to do. And the religious leaders like, nah, let's take him out. They're preaching a separate John the Baptist, a separate message. They're removing our authority. They're making us look bad. We're the standard, not them. That kind of thing. So then you get to this point in the message where it says, all right, so they did that to the people that I sent. And then God or the farmer says, I'm going to send my son. They won't do that. And then, what does it say that the religious leaders do in this moment?
Killing them.
They're like, if he comes, he'll take all the inheritance.
Yeah.
So if we kill him, who's going to give it to him? That's what they think.
Well, the reason that they would think that too is most of the time, if the son came back and not the farmer, they would assume that the farmer was dead.
Oh.
That the son was coming back to claim what was his. In that regard, with that mindset, they're like, oh, if we kill him, we're the ones working this. You know what I mean? We're the ones, so they kill him. So think about this analogy in the context of everything that's starting to unfold. Jesus, you think to the Gospel of Matthew, you look at the Sermon on the Mount, and in chapter 6, there's a ton of comparing to the religious leaders. All right, the religious leaders give out in the open, but I tell you, don't even let your right hand know what your left hand's going to do. If you're going to pray, the religious leaders go out in the streets and the synagogues. They pray out in the corners, these long, eloquent, to be praised by people. But for you, I tell you, go into a closet or a private room and pray like that. If you're going to fast, clean yourself up, because the religious leaders want you to know that they're fasting, so they look like they've been fasting. So, but for you, you know what I mean? Even from the difference between God and possessions, which we'll talk about this Sunday, to worrying, all of that other stuff. There's so many things where Jesus looks and he says, like, hey, don't be like the religious leaders. In fact, he'll go into the woes. I think there's 7 woes. And I don't remember what gospel. I think they're in the Gospel of John, where he's basically calling the religious leaders whitewashed tombs to their faces. You know what I mean? He's teaching. And they think that Jesus is what? Just like these prophets. But they don't understand that Jesus was a messenger sent by God. And what they don't know. It's weird, because this is really extremely prophetic in the moment, because Jesus is actually telling them what they're about to do. And then what do? No, that ain't us. We're gonna get upset. Like, they got offended. We're gonna plot to kill him. You're like, did you miss the parable?
Are you listening at all?
When you guys are reading this, what is the things that are standing out to you?
I mean, it's always fun to look at symbolism and look at what all the different things mean. And so right off the bat, I think honestly, how can you view this and not think of the gospel? Because it even says oh, I have a son whom I love, and it's okay, John 3:16. It's but I just think it's just straight up the gospel. I think it's funny. Or, I don't know, at the end where it's they're so upset because they obviously know, oh, he's talking about us.
Oh, yeah.
He's bad-mouthing us, but steadily. And so they're let's arrest him. But they couldn't, because they're, enslaved by people-pleasing that they can't even do what they want. And so it's just really funny. It's kind of
so much that they left.
Yeah. It's they wanted to arrest him, but they couldn't because of the crowd. They were afraid of the crowd.
It's interesting because they're the religious leaders, but they're being led by the opinions of those that they're called to lead, and that may be why there's no fruit. The other fruit may be because the reason that there would be no fruit is they were extremely prideful. One of the things that we've been talking about in our current series is they think they're the standard. If you could pray like me, look like me, you know what I mean? A belief system that they had was that God, the more blessed you were, or the more favored you were by God, the more material things you had.
Right.
I was like, that theology's trying to make its way back in the church. You know what I mean? And Jesus literally preaches against it. What's interesting to me is Jesus is so we know the religious leaders are familiar with the scripture, right? So Jesus is quoting, using the story of the vineyard, is actually quoting Isaiah chapter 5, and then he's going to quote the Psalms at the end. Right? The part where he says the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. So the stone that the builders rejected would be Christ. But what was the value of a cornerstone?
I I don't know, honestly. Like, I know it's important. I know that.
So
But
it sets the tone for the rest of the building.
That's
the portion
it.
of the building.
Before you started to build something, you set the cornerstone. The cornerstone was the very first stone to the project.
Okay.
So one of the commentaries I looked at talked about this being the shift from the religious leaders to the church movement.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Jesus would be the cornerstone to the church movement, the ecclesia.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? The gathering of believers. So I think that part's extremely interesting. That Jesus, in talking to religious leaders, would use scriptures in terms that they would be extremely familiar with. The difference between Isaiah 5 and this parable is the son.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Is that there is a son now involved, and then they're the ones that murdered him. And then he basically says, okay, so they killed the son, and you know the psalm, the stone that the builders rejected, became the cornerstone. It became the starting point of what God was actually doing.
Uh-huh. I like the emphasis on, and this is a little bit of a rabbit trail, but just like the son, the builders, it says they rejected it, or the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. I think of like people. I think sometimes people, like, we are so quickly to dismiss somebody because like they're weird or they're, I don't know, not appealing, or like, and so we reject them. But we actually, because we're rejecting them because of like surface reasons, like we're missing out on something God wants to do in them. And so it's, I mean, they're not going to become the next cornerstone, obviously, but I mean, it's like, how many stones are we rejecting that like they could actually be blessing our lives? Right. But we're so quick to judge and dismiss people.
That's a deal. Everyone gets mad at the religious leaders, but I mean, we do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were two perspectives that I was kind of thinking about this morning. I was listening to Matt Chandler, and he's reading a scripture, and he's like, he goes, everybody is created by God, but not everybody is a child of God. Right? He goes into, you're either a child of God or you're a child of wrath. And basically, to be a child of wrath is like Romans 1, where he's like, God handed you over to do whatever you wanted to do. Basically, it's that you didn't choose him. And he's like, and if you're saying that I'm judging you, let me be sure to tell you I'm not. You're giving this choice. So let's talk about judgment a little bit. I think judgment is when one person looks down at another person from a place of I'm greater than. Yeah. So the difference between accountability and judgment is position. If you think about it, right? The truth is we are called to hold each other accountable.
Yeah, that's
right. True. We're called to hold each other accountable. And the problem is that when it comes to accountability, like let's say I go and talk to you about something, a lot of times we get defensive because we want to justify our movement.
I was doing it because blah, 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 you don't understand. Yeah.
Or we think, oh, so you think you're better than me. But a lot of times that's not what's going on. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other side of it is a lot of times we judge other people because of our insecurity.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and I would ask that question, do you look at other people and think that they're judging you because you're insecure about something?
That's good.
You know what I mean? I think about it like from a pastor's perspective, how many people think that because I'm a pastor, I'm judging them? Yeah. And I'm like, I didn't even say anything. I just looked at you and waved. Yeah. You know what I mean? Just like, good morning.
Yes.
Why are you judging me?
And it's not fun. It's like, I really just wanted to talk to you and like have a conversation. But it's like, it's Yeah. No, I think Christians, I think it takes a certain maturity to like receive someone being like, hey, bro, I know you're a follower of Christ, so like, I know your standards and you're not meeting them. And I think it takes a certain maturity to be like, you're right, I'm sorry, I'll do better. And like stuff like that.
Jesus always spoke in parables, I feel like if we would learn to like approach it in that manner, it would be a lot less offensive.
I think we're like David a lot of times. You know what I mean? David kills Uriah because he sleeps with his wife, and then the prophet Nathan comes in and tells him basically this parable, and David gets all riled up. He's like, man, I would have that guy executed. And Nathan goes, you're that guy. You know what I mean? It's like, But I think that sometimes that's what we do. Like, okay, I think every leader can come into agreement with this, but there's a lot of times like if a leader, I've heard the leaders tell me about this. If they have a staff member that is not living like up to par or whatever, and what they'll try to do is just address it as if it's a corporate problem. And most of the time, the person that they're trying to convey the message to is like, "Oh, that's not me."
Yeah,
and you're like, "The whole reason I did this was it was." But I think we do that
about Sunday mornings.
Huh?
So you're talking about Sunday mornings?
Sometimes on Sunday morning, like we're
Hey,
always
you
like,
in the
"That
back
message
row."
is for them," and it's like, "No, the Lord's speaking to you." Yeah. But how many times, like in parables, I mean, are we like this? Like for example, like how many times has God sent something our direction for us to recognize, but we rejected it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I had a pastor ask me this one time, or tell me this. We think in perspective of the parable of the talents. If you don't know what that is, another situation like this, Jesus uses a parable where a master gives different tenants different amounts of money. 5 talents, 2 talents, or 1.
Mm-hmm.
The guy with 5 multiplies it. The guy with 2 goes and multiplies it. The guy with 1 buries it because he's afraid. He doesn't even invest. He doesn't use it. Right? And this pastor said, we're responsible for stewarding God's money. He goes, but my question is, am I going to be judged for not stewarding the talents that God sent in the church that I was supposed to multiply?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, so I mean, like you talk about rejecting people. What if the people that we cross paths with as teenagers, as adults, as elderly in our communities, what if the people that we're actually mad at are people that God sent for us to multiply? What if there's supposed to be this Elijah-Elisha exchange? Because if you think about it, Elisha did double what Elijah did, right? I think this. I think anybody we pour into, we give permission to do double what we did.
That's good.
You know what I mean? Because you're giving them your tool set while building onto theirs. And your goal isn't to make them you,
right.
It's to make them with an extra skill set.
That's actually a really cool perspective, like as a pastor. Because like you have like your whole congregation, you're like, well, in theory, this whole flock should like double talents. And then like same thing with youth. Like I think about all the kids, like they should double. Like it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But
you see it. I mean, it
those, I would propose that maybe those that are the most tuned in, that's what you see. Because I think about people like Scott Sims. Scott Sims. If you don't know Scott, Scott's amazing, a big-time leader in our church.
Helps out with youth all the time.
Yeah, leads his family well, like chases his wife.
Works out all the time.
So he's a bodybuilder. So.
He's super swole. His kids are phenomenal, like leaders too. And I think about, Scott's like tuned in all the time on Wednesdays, on Sundays, and it kind of seemed like how he's growing in the Lord. Like, I think that's multiplication. I think those that lean in, like, get multiplied. And even that's our responsibility as leaders is to, like, I think we learn, we grow by reaching out to those that maybe are in different demographics or who've been doing it longer, So for me, I call Matt Johnson my pastor. You know what I mean? He's been in ministry longer than me. We see things maybe a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, we both believe in Jesus, and we walk out of the room on the same page.
Right.
But that's how we learn. If you want to grow, sometimes you've got to lean in.
Yeah. With our kids, we have typically about 70 students who come on Wednesdays, but there's only a small handful. I would say maybe 10 or 15 that really lean in and they want to know. You can see it on their face when we're in message and they're like taking notes or whatever. They come up to me afterwards and they have questions. You can kind of tell the difference. The kids who are really genuinely interested, and it's really exciting because we'll work with them more because we know they want it more, and they've shown efforts and they're asking these questions, and so we'll dig in together, and it's really cool to see them grow and to have the that aha moment when we get into the word and we're finding things out, and they're kind of finding freedom from like these anxieties and stuff about like the
They're
world.
stepping out. Yeah, the guy come in for a run through yesterday.
Yeah, we have a kid who's gonna preach tomorrow. Literally, like no special event. Like he's just. I mean, today's Wednesday. Hello, but yeah, he just came up to me and asked me. He's like, "You want to do it?" And I thought he was messing with me. I was like, "Okay, yeah, we'll do it next Wednesday." And he was like, "Okay." And I was like, "Oh, he's for real." And I've seen so much change in that kid. I'm really proud of it. But it's so cool to see these kids grow and get after it. And like, yeah, you work with the ones that are wanting to. I mean, I work with everybody. Don't get me wrong. Like, I make an effort to know everybody's name. How you doing? How was band? Oh yeah, how's football going? Blah blah. Like, I make an effort to know everybody. But there's like, I don't have favorites necessarily. But like, I definitely have kids that are
More involved.
after it more.
I heard a pastor say this. She said, you can influence the many, but you'll impact the few. And think about the way that Jesus did his ministry. There were crowds, and he was able to speak into them. But those that he really, really like changed their life, their thinking, and empowered were the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
So he spoke, maybe fed 5,000, 15, 20,000 people in some settings. But the ones that went on to really go and change the world were the 12 that he spent his most time with. They were the ones that I would say leaned in. They were the ones that were multiplied into.
I think we talked about this one other time, and it gave me a lot of comfort as a pastor, because I remember thinking like, don't have favorites. Like I do, like I want to love all of them equally. But like when you were telling me like, Jesus, like he preached to the crowd, and then he had his 12 disciples, and then he had like the three, and then he had like John the Beloved. Like it gets like. the circle gets smaller.
That was it.
Yeah.
It was, was it James, Peter, and John?
Yeah, I was like
three. You got the 12, James, Peter, and John, and then you got John the Beloved, who was so close to Jesus that he gave himself his own nickname. You know what I mean? But his nickname, this is interesting, his nickname was not based on his love for Jesus. It was based on Jesus' love for him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which realistically should be the root and the foundation of how we live all of our lives. Right. Peter, that's a whole nother thing. We'll save that for another conversation. But kind of working our way back to this, if we could give a takeaway for people listening back on the Vineyard text, what would you say the takeaway would be from today's Bible study?
For me, I mean, as a farmer, I know it's like what I always revert back to, but as a farmer, especially if you're a tenant farmer, like what this is talking about, like you want to do the best you can with the land. Because, I mean, in real life, if you're a tenant farmer, you get a certain percentage of the crop that you bring in, and then a certain percentage goes to the owner. And to me, that's how the kingdom works as well, because, God gives us our inheritance as well. And so I would just tell you guys to be encouraged by that. Get to work. Don't worry about who gets the credit for what, and just do what you're called to do.
That's good.
Naomi, what would you say?
I mean, I'm stuck on the Cornerstone, and like the stone they rejected is now the Cornerstone. So maybe not being so. I know that's like totally not the main part, but it's just like maybe not rejecting those who are not like super well spoken. Like, I mean, they might surprise you.
Well, since we're in this new season, right, the change from the religious leaders to the church age, and to partner off what you said, I think one of the things that comes to mind is where Jesus said, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The harvest are plenty, but the workers are few. Like, I think just right where you are, whether you're Amarillo or Panhandle, White Deer, Claude, Border, or anywhere else, like you're a farmer in a vineyard that God has planted you in. You know what I mean? And how you do will determine how much fruit you get to give him. It makes me think about like building 1 Corinthians 3 that we both talked on, and things going through the fire. I want to be able to give God some fruit back. You know what I mean? So just my encouragement for you today would be lean in right where you are. Work the field that you've been given. Right? Don't wonder. Don't go to the place of, well, I wish I was here, because if I was here, I was more effective. If God wanted you there, you would be there, right? Work the field that you've been planted, and let's bring some fruit back to the farmer, right? All right, anything else? Hey, that's this week's Bible study. Thank you guys for tuning in, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, or you listen to this on our podcast later. We'd love for you to do a couple things. One, like it, share it. If you're on podcast, subscribe. We'd love for you to just join in with us every week. And if you've got a home church, go worship where you are. If you don't, come join us this Sunday. But again, the reason we do this is we want to grow together right where we are. So we hope you guys have an amazing week.
Remember when we were like,